Canada's relationship with the US, how to put this, it's not super great. And now the American owners of Canada's oldest company, the Bay, just filed for creditor protection.
You know, one has to wonder if perhaps that isn't part of the problem too, that this jewel has been in foreign possession and maybe not appreciated in the way that it ought to have been.
So what could it take to revive the Bay? Hi, I'm Paul Haverstrood. Welcome to The Cost of Living. The Bay has survived for 355 years. It's made it through literal cannon fire. But what's proving to be even more dangerous than that? U.S. private equity. Also today, $318. That's the price of a lift ticket at one of Canada's big ski resorts. And for that, you don't even get 4 wheels and a steering wheel. How did skiing get so expensive? Up first, sweet vindication for some ideas you may or may not like. We hand out the first ever I Told You So awards. So Jen, do you ever say to anyone, I told you so?
You mean out loud? No.
Right? Like it can be a bit smug, but sometimes you just got to say it. So today, we're doing something just a little bit different.
That's right. We are handing out the first annual Cost of Living I Told You So awards.
And depending on how this goes, it could be the last annual awards.
Yes. So these are ideas that have fallen out of fashion, but now because of this really extraordinary moment that we're in, they are being looked at in a new light.
And they're all like, see? This is what I was talking about.
Right? Now, before we get to the winners, we should just put this out there. We're not endorsing any of these ideas or trying to reopen any of these debates.
No, we're just recognizing, hey, some things are having a moment. So, without further ado, let's get to our first I Told You So award.
This is our bronze medal winner.
Do we have the budget for medals?
Yeah, I think we can afford fake medals for our fake awards.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then. The bronze medal goes to supply management.
Now, supply management is, that was good, by the way. Supply management is Canada's system for managing eggs, poultry, and dairy.
Now, critics say it keeps prices too high. They want to see it dismantled.
And lately, it's really been on the hot seat. Donald Trump has been taking shots at it. He says stuff like, Canada treats us very badly on dairy.
So, supply management, not universally beloved. But then, you look at egg prices in the U.S.
They're predicted to increase 41% this year.
Egg prices are still sky high. They're rising as the potential.
Sending prices to record levels across the U.S.
U.S. egg prices right now are like $9 Canadian for a dozen, and that's triple the usual price Americans pay.
Now, the issue here is avian flu. It's forcing farmers to cull their chicken flocks. Egg supply is way down. But that is not happening to nearly the same extent here in Canada.
Here's the big difference, right, between what we have going here and what they have happening down in the U.S. It's the scale of production. I don't think a lot of Canadians realize just how vastly different the scale of production is when we're talking about getting your eggs.
That's Phil Mount. He's with the National Farmers Union. And when he talks about the size of some of these egg producers down south,
the biggest in the U.S., Cal-Maine Foods, has 44.5 million laying hens.
So down there they have a free market system, and that means their industrial farms have become huge. 200 big producers supply 95% of U.S. egg demand.
Whereas here in Canada, we have more than 1,000 egg producers. They're much smaller, spread out between the provinces, and that's on purpose because under supply management, every province has its own production of dairy and eggs.
So then if one province has a problem with supply, other provinces can step in, cover the demand, and you get something like bird flu, well, then we have smaller farms here, more diversified supply. It means that doesn't wipe out the egg supply for an entire region.
So if I am supply management here in Canada, I might be thinking, I told you so.
Right? So we asked Phil to accept an award on behalf of supply management. He was sheepish to do that, but I badgered him enough that he did say,
I think supply management has a I told you so moment right here. I hate to see it come off the backs of, a disease sweeping across U.S. producers. But yeah, it's definitely an I told you so moment for Canadian supply management.
If you listen, Jen, you can almost hear the chickens clucking their thank yous.
The distant sound of bok bok. Okay, on to the next award. Our silver medal goes to pipelines.
Because until the last few months, the idea of a major new pipeline project was just off the table. Keystone XL, blocked. Northern Gateway, canceled. Energy East was done.
Then Donald Trump comes along with his tariffs, and now we have a lot of people saying, hey, we can't be so reliant on selling to the United States. We need to find new customers. And of course, our biggest export is oil.
Jean Chrétien at the Liberal Leadership Convention, he was talking pipelines.
To build infrastructure that are needed in Canada. For example, to build a pipeline for natural gas from Alberta to Quebec.
Did not have Chrétien talking about a new cross-Canada pipeline on my 2025 bingo card.
No. It just tells you, though, how much the conversation has really changed.
If you had told me 6 months ago Northern Gateway would be a live discussion, I wouldn't have believed you.
That's Heather Exner-Perot. She's the Director of Natural Resources at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. She says this is quite a turnaround to see former pipeline opponents coming around to her way of thinking.
The case has been proven of why we want to have export pipelines to the West Coast. And I think let's double down on that and do a Northern Gateway. Asia's 10 times the population of the United States, and they're growing, much faster as well. So let's get it out there to those markets that want it.
Now, we should note here that no big pipeline company is actually saying we're going to build a new line.
No, but the head of the TMX pipeline is now talking about expanding its capacity by a third in the next 5 years. So, pipelines, congratulations on being our silver medal winner in the first ever I Told You So awards.
Which brings us to our gold medal, Jen. Let me give you a drum roll.
The gold medal goes to our former Prime Minister, the late John Turner.
Why John Turner? Well, in 1988, he was running against Brian Mulroney. Mulroney was championing free trade with the U.S. Turner, not so much. And in the leaders' debate, they got into it.
We built a country, east and west and north. We built it on an infrastructure that deliberately resisted the continental pressure of the United States. For 120 years, we've done it. With one signature of a pen, you've reversed that, thrown us into the north-south influence of the United States, and will reduce us, I'm sure, to a colony of the United States, because when the economic levers go, the political independence is sure to follow. Mr. Turner, with the document.
Ooh, kind of got chills there.
Right? Of course, Brian Mulroney went on to win that election, and it really won the argument around free trade, which, let's just say, has been really good for Canada in a lot of ways. But not entirely. It also has cracks, including a very big Trump-sized crack that we're seeing show up right now.
Yeah. Now, Steve Paikin is best known as the host of The Agenda on TVO, but he also wrote a biography about his friend John Turner. He said Turner actually liked the idea of more trade. It was just Mulroney's specific deal he opposed.
And he opposed it because I remember him telling me he went up to Collingwood on a ski trip. And while his family was all out there on the hills, he took that 1,200-page agreement and, like the lawyer he was, he read every single chapter and verse of that agreement. And when he came back to Ottawa after that trip to Collingwood, he basically told his caucus, I'm in favor of freer trade with the United States, but this agreement isn't good and it won't be good for Canada in the long run.
Steve says John Turner did see the potential for something like Trump. Like, he didn't predict Donald Trump exactly, but he saw a scenario where America could try to strong-arm Canada.
He loved Americans, but he didn't have any illusions that America was always out for America first. And if it worked out that Canada and the US could do good things together, then great. But he was wary of them.
Hey, when you hand over the economic levers, Jed.
Well, it did take 37 years, but John Turner has earned, and I told you so.
So we asked Steve if he would accept John Turner's gold medal.
Well, if Mr. Turner knew I was going up there to accept the award on his behalf, he'd say, Bacon, keep your seat. I can handle it from here. Thanks very much. I think he would happily tell everybody, or unhappily tell everybody, this is what I was concerned about. This is why I went through that 1,200-page document, and I read it so clearly, because I was concerned that in the long run, we could be setting ourselves up for a big headache here. And I think everybody certainly is overdoing the Advil these days, trying to keep up with all the craziness coming out of the White House.
That's next week, the first annual Advil Awards.
Lots of contenders for those ones. And again, we are not endorsing anything here. It's just that sometimes you get to say, I told you so.
So congratulations to all our winners. And what do you think? Did we miss something? Anything out there you think could be saying, I told you so? Give us a call and let us know. Our number is 1-866-550-COST. That's 1-866-550-2678. Or email costofliving@cbc.ca. On your Radio and by podcast, this is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Havershood. No one needs to tell anyone how pricey stuff has become. We've all lived through inflation. But some things have gone up so high, so fast, it can still be like, whew. Like skiing. Lift ticket prices at Canada's big resorts have people going a long way to find some cheaper turns. Like a long way.
Scott Davies just got back from his annual ski trip.
It was amazing, and I could take up way more than 15 minutes just yammering on about that, but I won't do that.
Oh no, do go on.
The snowbanks in town were like 10 feet tall, and every day we were skiing like knee-deep powder. It was pretty nuts.
Usually, Scott and his buddies go somewhere in Canada. But this year, they went to Japan, and not just for the snow.
Like, I think when we added up, it was like cheaper than going to places in the Rockies.
In Japan, food and hotels cost them less. So did lift tickets. And it was the same story last year when they skied the Austrian Alps.
$60 for a day. And it's not like you're going to some rinky-dink little hill.
Here in Canada, it can cost between $150 and $300 a day to ride the gondola. At some big ski areas, the price of a lift ticket has jumped more than 100% in the last 5 years. Industry experts say a lot of this has to do with consolidation. Big companies buying multiple ski resorts across North America. U.S. giant Vail owns 42 of them, including Whistler Blackcomb. And Revelstoke belongs to the same company that owns Denny's and the Dallas Stars. Less competition means higher prices. In Europe, there's just more choice. There are 15 times the ski hills there than in Canada.
Skiing and being on the mountain is part of their lifestyle. It's part of who they are, their identity.
Richard Savage is the president of Snow Savvy Marketing in Toronto.
The European model is state-run, maybe family-run and owned. Individual restaurants and hotels and pieces of that ski area are owned and operated by different pieces.
Pubs, ski schools, chalets. He says everything is way more competitive.
Because it's all like fiercely independent and independently owned and operated on the mountains, you've got so many options. You can pop in for a pint and a slice or whatever for less money than you would spend in any North American destination. And then again, the lift tickets are relatively inexpensive.
Why? Well, a lot of European resorts get government funding and subsidies, which help keep ticket prices low. This is also the case in Japan. But Paul Pinchbeck with the Canadian Ski Council says you can ski on this continent without breaking the bank.
There's 240 ski areas in Canada. So, there are still some good deals. And yes, under $100 or under $50 or $60 in some markets.
Many hills even have a deal for first-time skiers. A lift ticket, gear rental, and a lesson for under $30. And if you want to ski the big resorts, buy your season pass for next year right now. That's where you'll find the deep discounts. But for Scott Davies, that's just too big of a commitment. Because if you get a bad snow year,
you've pre-bought your stuff and, commit to spending $1,000 on lift tickets when you're not even sure if you're going to, enjoy those days or if you would have rather spent that money on other things.
Like skiing in the Alps.
Even if you have totally crap snow all week in Austria, you're still in Austria finding castles and looking at old towns.
And eating mountains of Wiener Schnitzel. For The Cost of Living, I'm Danielle Nerman.
This is The Cost of Living on your radio, by podcast, and on Sirius Channel 169. I'm Paul Haverstrood. Whatever you were doing in the year 1670, you probably weren't as busy as Hudson's Bay Company. That was when it got a royal charter for a trading monopoly over the entire watershed of Hudson's Bay. Since then, it's been through a lot. It survived the French Navy assaulting its forts. Now, it's in another big fight. The Bay has asked for creditor protection. This could mean closing half of its 80 stores. How did things get this bad for North America's oldest company? Doug Stevens is a retail analyst and the founder of Retail Profit. Hi, Doug.
Hi, how are you, Paul?
I'm well, thanks. So, Doug, let's go back to 2008. That was the year a private equity investor, Richard Baker, he bought the Bay. Do you think the writing was on the wall for the Bay when that happened?
To some extent, you could make that argument. I mean, if we sort of look at the modus operandi of private equity, sort of as a class of ownership, typically speaking, private equity is buying distressed assets, and it's doing one of two things. It's either going to try to breathe new life into that asset, or it's going to try and take that asset apart and sell the parts for more than the sum of the whole. So in this case, when NRDC bought Hudson's Bay, it was an open question as to what they would do. And I would argue that in 2008, when they installed Bonnie Brooks at the helm of the company, it looked as though there was a glimmer of hope. There was, at least on the surface of it anyway, a defined strategy. Bonnie Brooks was coming to the company with sort of a merchant mentality. She was really promoting it as a place where you could go for fashion and style. The problem was, in the backdrop, the stores were not mirroring that message. You were still walking into Bay stores and finding them really poorly maintained. Service levels weren't what they needed to be. The merchandising was sloppy. And so you had this message going out to the public that, hey, we're the place to come for fashion. But when you went there, it just, again, felt like an old, tired, mid-level department store. And so that lasted for about 5 years. And Bonnie Brooks, if I'm not mistaken, left in 2013. And really from that point on, Paul, there hasn't been any sort of detectable retail strategy apart from just cutting.
Well, yeah, the Bay has been called a real estate play, and Sears was called a real estate play. We know what happened to Sears. When that is said about a retailer, is that a fairly ominous sign?
Well, yeah, it is. And again, it kind of goes back to the whole idea of private equity management. And so I believe that Richard Baker and NRDC have really looked at all of their retail assets, not as, operating companies that can be revitalized and generate all kinds of profit. I really do believe at the core of it, they look at this as being just a series of real estate assets. And look, I mean, to be fair, we have to acknowledge the fact that, yes, there have been, even since 2008, there have been external challenges that the brand has had to deal with. We've seen a greater polarization of income and wealth in Canada. We've seen a contraction of the mid-market of retail, which hasn't just affected the Bay, it's affected really virtually every brand that sits in that mid-market position. The strength and the growth of online shopping has been tremendous. Amazon, of course, has been eating virtually everybody's lunch. But again, it comes down to what is the story that you're trying to tell. I mean, the last big Hail Mary that Hudson's Bay did was to relaunch small versions of Zellers inside the Bay, which frankly left everyone, including myself, scratching our heads. So it has really been woefully lacking in any sort of on-the-ground strategy to turn the brand around.
Or as you say, on-the-ground investment. I mean, you go in there and they're starting to look, kind of run down. What does it do to a person's mentality when they walk in and they see that the escalator is broken or you can't find someone to check you out when you want to buy something?
I believe it's no different than if you were to go over to someone's house for dinner and, you sit down and you're sitting at a dirty table and they bring you your meal and it's on a plate that hasn't been washed, and the food is burned and the whole house is in disarray. As a guest, you would sort of say, well, clearly you didn't care that I was coming over, right? I mean, it's not that you didn't know I was going to come here. You knew, you just didn't care.
Now, that's the Bay, but we also know the Bay is a big anchor tenant for a lot of malls across the country. So if you're a Cadillac Fairview right now, you're running these malls, what's going through your head?
Well, as I said, this has been, a long time coming, obviously. And I don't think that if you're someone at Cadillac Fairview or Oxford Properties or any of the major mall developers and owners, you're not surprised by this. The reality of it is that anchor stores and the Bay and Sears, they typically don't pay very high rent. Those leases are not, from a financial standpoint, incredibly important to a Cadillac Fairview or anyone else. The problem is if the Bay leaves, who do you fill it with? And so there have been tremendous conversations around different kinds of tenancies. We've seen discussions around fitness getting into shopping centers. We're already starting to see that, big fitness centers moving in, grocery coming back to those shopping centers. Things like dividing the space up, subdividing it, and creating marketplaces of different sort of smaller sellers of things. And one of the key things that Cadillac Fairview and others are now working on is actually building mixed-use developments around those shopping centers. So it's not inconceivable that we could actually see the Hudson's Bay store become retrofitted for residential occupancy.
Huh. But, Doug, when I think about the Bay, companies rise, companies fall. That's how things go. So I don't know why I'm feeling maybe just a little bit nostalgic here. But when you look at what's happening with the Bay, do you feel at all a little sad?
I do because, we throw around the word iconic a lot. But I truly believe that there are very few brands in the world that we could truly caption under that word. And certainly this is one of them, because it's not just a part of our commercial landscape. It's part of our national fabric, and I use that term figuratively and literally because, when we think of Hudson's Bay, oftentimes we think of the Hudson's Bay blanket. So it's of historical significance to this country. And, one has to wonder if perhaps that isn't part of the problem too, that this jewel has been in foreign possession and maybe not appreciated in the way that it ought to have been.
Well, we also are in this moment where Canadians from coast to coast to coast, we're feeling pretty patriotic for a lot of obvious reasons, and we're pulling together. Do you think there might be new owners out there, maybe a Canadian owner, a Canadian retailer who would want to take over the Bay, revive it, and turn it back into a successful national retailer and has the wherewithal to do that?
I actually thought the same thing myself. I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if some consortium or some entity in the Canadian marketplace were able to reclaim this asset? Even if someone like Shopify, a Canadian company, were to buy Hudson's Bay and use it as a means of bringing together a lot of smaller independent Canadian retailers under one roof, that would be pretty cool. I can't think of many brands that would be worth more than Hudson's Bay in this country.
All right, we'll see if maybe it might end up in Canadian hands at some point down the road. It's made it 355 years. Maybe it's got a few more left in it. Doug Stevens, thank you so much for all that.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Doug Stevens is a retail analyst and the founder of Retail Profit. That's all for the show. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. The show is produced by Daniel Nerman, Blair Sanderson, and Jennifer Keane, with help from Jeff Kynock. I'm Paul Habersrud. Thanks for listening.